Another Tuesday, another brief. Let's talk news. The US, though through Kamala Harris, vowed to make Russia pay for all of its crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine. The foreign minister of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, explained how world leaders view peace these days. Russia might finally be formally excluded from the UN Security Council, and one of the creators of Minsk agreements told us the truth about them. With that, hi, my name is Yewleea and you're watching The Brief, where we talk about everything that happened in and pertaining to Ukraine in the week thus far in about 20 minutes. Let's go! The US Vice President Kamala Harris made a speech in which she said that all those responsible for the crimes against humanity committed in Ukraine during Russian aggression are ought to be punished. And for that, the US is allocating almost $40 million as for the State Department. The Congress is working to allocate $28 million to bring those responsible in court to justice, internationally and in Ukraine. And another 10 million is going to go towards documenting and preserving the evidence of those war crimes being committed. Those actions constitute a very big step forward for the world, as it's the first time that the US officially admitted that Russia has indeed committed multiple crimes against humanity in Ukraine. And it's statements like these that make the rest of the world reconsider their approach to peace. For instance, Germany and US oppose peace if the price for it is territorial concessions in Ukraine. And that is a very, very far walk from where we started a year ago, when almost every leader of the free world was telling Ukraine to consider ceding territory for the sake of Russia leaving. If we do that, we'll open Pandora's box around the world, and every potential aggressor will conclude, if Russia can get away with it, we can get away with it. The US will support the decision on the future of Ukraine that will be made by Ukrainians. Washington is interested in establishing a just and lasting peace. For this, Ukraine must have tools to stop aggression in the future. And those words of Secretary of State Antony Blinken were also echoed by Annalena Baerbock. All demands to hand over the regions captured by Russia to hand over Ukraine would mean encouraging this war. We will not do that. And then Kamala Harris herself reinforced the notion that there will be no territorial concessions, and she has no illusions of what's about to come. I have no illusions about what lies ahead. There will be new dark days in Ukraine. The daily agony of the war will continue. The consequences of the war will be felt by the countries of the near and far region, from Africa to Southeast Asia and the Caribbean. If Putin thinks he can wait for our retreat, he's deeply mistaken. Time is not on his side. And the intentions of the United States to help Ukraine defeat Russia, once and for all, were only further reinforced by this surprising event. The United States President Joe Biden visited Kyiv on Monday. Earlier in the week, it was reported that he would be meeting Zelensky in Warsaw. However, plans changed, and now he is meeting him in the capital of Ukraine, which is a huge message to send. It's Joe Biden's first visit to Ukraine since the full-scale invasion, and this visit might be one of the most important ones. It reassures Putin about just how serious the world is in guaranteeing Ukraine's security. Just a gentle reminder that you could help me spread the word by tricking the algorithm a little bit. Please give this video a like, leave a comment to which I will most definitely respond, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications. And if you're feeling extra generous and you want to support my journalism, you can join my Patreon, the link to which is in the description of this video, or become a member of this channel, and I will be so incredibly grateful. Thank you. And speaking of that, meanwhile, in Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba voiced what, in his opinion, are the best guarantees of security for Ukraine today. The best security guarantees before Ukraine joins NATO are money, sanctions, and weapons. However, belief in the victory of Ukraine is much more important. This is the main principle of policy formation, from which everything else will follow. And then he was asked by a journalist whether Kyiv has enough weapons to fight, to which he responded that as long as Ukraine is at war with Russia, there will never be enough weapons. He also noted that nobody is pushing Ukraine to negotiate with Putin anymore. Well, apart from China, but we're not gonna talk about that. The rest of the world sees exactly what Putin is doing and understands that there is no point in any negotiation. And then he, as people say these days on the internet, clapped back at those countries, like China, who are still looking for peaceful negotiations. I like those who seek peace through diplomatic initiatives because I'm a diplomat myself. But how can such an initiative work? Should the price of peace be that Russia remains in the occupied territories? At the beginning of any negotiations with Russia, there must be a condition. The territorial integrity of Ukraine must be fully restored. This is non-negotiable. Many people who are supporters of peace and diplomacy really only want the victory of the Russian Federation over Ukraine. And that's very true because really countries like China are not interested in peace. They're interested in peace, where Russia is no longer involved in the war and can return back to being their partner in crime and in making money. So really, they're interested in peace in terms of sanctions being lifted off of Russia, not in peace in terms of Russia not killing Ukrainian civilians anymore. Meanwhile, the United States, on the other hand, does not object to strikes on military facilities in Crimea anymore. According to the US Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland, the US considers Crimea to be a part of Ukraine that has been turned into a giant military base by Russia. She also pointed out that right after the occupation of Crimea, the Russian Federation immediately resorted to human rights violations, such as persecuting the ethnic population of the peninsula of Crimea, Crimean Tatars. Well, and everybody else who disagreed with occupation. But Crimean Tatars are someone that I talk about on this channel very often. If you didn't know, Crimean Tatars have gone through 5 genocides from Russian Federation over the last 200 years, and 3 previous ones were in the 20th century. The very reason why a lot of people believe that Crimea is ethnically Russian is because they wiped out so many Crimean Tatars that it's hard to say that there are enough of them to have been there forever. But make no mistake, the ethnic population of Crimea are Tatars. The reason why there are so many Russians is because those Tatars have been killed and substituted by Russians. I will not prejudge where Ukrainians decide to fight and what decisions they will make regarding Crimea in the short, medium, or long term, but we recognize that Crimea is Ukraine. Right on. And then speaking of liberation of Ukrainian territories, General Mark Milley has some predictions. This year, it will also be very, very difficult for Ukraine to expel the Russians from every centimeter of the occupied territory. This does not mean that it cannot happen, but it will be extremely difficult, and it will require, in fact, the collapse of the Russian army, which we're going to be able to accomplish so long as the West gives us the weapons we ask for, and helps us in negotiations of bringing back the people who helped us defend this country, which this week we have fantastic news on the topic. Ukraine was able to return 101 defenders from Russian captivity. In particular, they include defenders of Mariupol and fighters from Azovstal. Many of them, of course, received injuries of varying degrees of severity and are currently being checked out by the medical personnel on the territory controlled by Ukraine. The exchange took place at the ratio 101-101. And here is a video of one of Ukrainian defenders reacting to being back home. There are no words necessary, right? The 101 defenders that Russia returned home this week might be the only batch of good news they received. Meanwhile, in Russia, the European Parliament is finally calling on the exclusion of Russia from the UN Security Council. An amendment was proposed for the resolution to the anniversary of Russia's aggression against Ukraine on February 24th, and it was supported by most of the MEPs. So this amendment will be included in the final version of the resolution, and hopefully it'll be Russia's final time on the UN Security Council. While Russia is suffering potentially one of the biggest losses so far for them on the political spectrum, they're also suffering, evidently, very huge losses on the battlefield, maybe even larger than we expected. In the occupied Crimea, they have begun mass collections of blood. In addition to the peninsula, the transfusion centers are also being opened in Rostov, Voronezh, and Belgorod, and the nurses are calling to urgently donate blood because the occupiers are losing lots of forces. And the Institute for the Study of War, a DC think tank, is concluding that Russia does not have enough personnel or equipment to fulfill their promised large offensive. And the CNN believes that they might not be able to gather forces for the offensive before May at all. They call the offensive, and I quote, more desired than actual. Oof. They have gathered enough manpower to maybe, emphasis on maybe, capture 1 or 2 small villages. But that's all. And that's very different from the sense of panic that Russia is trying to sow in Ukraine for this huge offensive operation they're planning. They haven't even started the second wave of mobilization. To be fair, they haven't even completed the goal of the first wave of mobilization. The 300,000 mobilized? They mobilized about 285,000, and now they're shooting at 500,000. How do you think that's gonna go? And because they can't fulfill their goal of capturing the whole of Ukraine, they're now planning on creating the Korean scenario in the country. And such scenario is proposed by none other than Ukraine's biggest treasoner and traitor, Viktor Medvedchuk. Yeah, the cousin friend of Putin that he exchanged for a whooping 200 men from captivity. That one. Russia now faces the task of making the so-called Korean option. The Kremlin has already realized that they cannot completely take over our country, and now they will build Plan B. Medvedchuk believes that he's a professional person in Ukraine, but this is not so. He's just a traitor. And a disgrace, personally, in my opinion, but oh well. The most dreary news for the Russian Federation this week must be in the 10th package of sanctions from the EU. The European Union has decided to do the unspeakable and ban the export of toilets to Russia. I genuinely don't know if that's gonna impact anything, because as we know that more than 70% of the population of Russia don't have toilets. But I mean, hey, sad news nonetheless. Really hurt them in that spot that hurts. Toilets. And Wagner PMC had Prigozhin, who was Russia's biggest hope once and now is Russia's biggest discarded politician slash military commander slash Putin's former friend, tried to form a coalition with Ramzan Kadyrov, the head of Chechnya, to disgrace the Russian Defense Ministry. And unfortunately, he was rejected. Well, damn, even Kadyrov rejected you. That must hurt. So much rejection in Russia this week. Anyways, because I'm not a bad person and I don't want to concentrate on Russia's shortcomings this week, we're gonna move on to international affairs. The head of Munich Security Conference, Christoph Heusgen, believes that Russia needs to provide some sort of authority for German and Russian relationships to be restored. He says that since all the decisions in Russia are made by the current president, the term deputinization is what fits. It fully corresponds to the term denazification, and that is exactly what allies did to Germany after the fall of the Nazi regime. But I'd like to point out that unlike Navalny, the Russian opposition leader, wants you to believe, deputinization does not only mean removal of Putin, it means a complete removal of his government, of all of Russia's structures that have been built in the past 30 years, 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, because let's face it, they're all the same still, and a complete change of the imperialistic mindset that more than 80% of Russian citizens bear, not just removal of one person. And more than 60% of European citizens believe that it's possible and believe in Ukraine's victory in the war. The opinions varied by country, from 51% in Italy to over 80% in Poland. And because not all news can be positive, we're gonna move on to something awful. The Financial Times posted a complete disinformation article about arms smuggling in Ukraine. On February 6th, an article titled "Prime Minister of Moldova calls for increased aid to curb arms smuggling from Ukraine" hit the pages of the newspaper. It is also noted that allegedly Havrilitsa said that she is observing an increase in smuggling of weapons, people, and goods from Ukraine against the background of war. Then the spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Oleg Nikolenko, noted that her quotes do not correspond to the title of the article and that the author of the article does not provide any evidence whatsoever that such occurrences happened. Moreover, we have not received any confirmed information or concrete facts from the Moldovan side about the supply of contraband weapons from Ukraine. In his opinion, this material is yet another piece of disinformation, the purpose of which is to discredit international military aid to Ukraine. In this regard, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs requires the Financial Times to conduct an editorial investigation investigation into matters that have signs of disinformation in the interest of Russia. Russia is investing numerous resources to prevent the supply of Western weapons to our country against the backdrop of a new offensive by the Russian army. It is obvious that the Financial Times article was intended to increase the fear in the West that the weapons would reach Ukraine and turn against the Western countries by falling into the hands of criminal elements. More than that, the US has sent an independent commission to oversee the aid to Ukraine, and they have not found any instances of this aid being sold, trafficked, or falling into the wrong hands. They said there was no misuse. And speaking of Russians and their lies in the international arena, one of the authors of the Minsk II agreement admitted that the Russian Federation was never going to fulfill it. Putin's former aide Vladislav Surkov admitted that the agreements were drafted in such a manner that they could not be fulfilled. With such statements, Surkov admitted that the Russian Federation was not trying to establish peace in Donbass like they claimed, and that Ukraine could not have not fulfilled the agreements that were not fulfillable to begin with.
I'm so damn confused.
And despite a Russian recent campaign to also discredit Ukrainian refugees abroad, all of their efforts are coming to a null, with Germany releasing a statement that the influx of Ukrainian refugees has helped take the burden off of the labor market. 90,000 Ukrainians have already found work in Germany, and the Federal Employment Agency predicts that the number is going to increase in the coming weeks and months. And perhaps one of the most reassuring statements towards Ukraine's future this week came from Joseph Borrell. We have to change our procedural rules. It will change the size of Europe. When you go from 27 members to 33, it requires adapted decision-making rules. It will be hard work, because even before the war, Ukraine had many problems. Ukraine must transform its structures, fight corruption, and develop the economy. All this is now destroyed. Ukraine is a member of the EU. It just needs to be institutionalized. They must do the work, and we will help them and do the work from our side, whether someone likes it or not. And that is one of the most concrete statements on what the feelings are in Europe about Ukraine joining the alliance. And with that, that's all I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and if you've made it so far, I know you've enjoyed this video and found it informative, so please give it a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. And if you really want to support my journalism, which I would so highly be grateful for, because I do this full time and it really helps, you could join my Patreon or become a member of this channel, and it will go a very long way in helping me continue delivering content to you guys. Thank you so much. Don't forget to check your sources, don't fall for propaganda, and I will see you next time.